I just wanted to introduce myself. So for those that I haven't met, my name is Paulina Fayer. I've lived in San Francisco almost 30 years and in District 8 for just over a decade. I lead Activ8SF, which is a group of D8 residents who want a more functional city government led by the most sensible and competent appointees and electeds. So here with me is my co-lead, Lawrence Lee. He's a longtime D8 resident. And here on this forum today are Supervisor Mandelman and candidate Kate Stoia, who's challenging him for the seat. So of course, a very important aspect of our city government is electing the best supervisors across all of our 11 districts. And this November, even numbered districts, including D8, are electing new supervisors. In D8, as we know, Kate Stoia is challenging Supervisor Mandelman, and they've graciously agreed to join our forum tonight. Before I allow each of them a couple of minutes to introduce themselves, I'll go over the basic logistics for this forum. So we're focused on D8, but other San Franciscans are welcome. We'd like to go about an hour, absolutely no longer than an hour and a half. The hosts, Lawrence and I, prepared 6 questions for the candidates. I'll ask them one by one and allow incumbent Mandelman, followed by candidate Stoia, up to 3 minutes to answer each. And Lawrence will keep the time to keep things honest. Then we'll open the floor for the audience questions, starting with a few folks that asked, when they RSVP'd, and people will be able to ask those. And then at the end, the candidates will each have about a minute for closing remarks. And neighbors are muted by default. So, like when you guys do ask questions, while folks, including candidates, I'll say this, may challenge each other, we do expect people to be respectful. So with that, let's have Supervisor Mandelman please kick us off.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Paulina, and hello, everyone. Thanks to Activ8SF for giving us this first forum. I am your District 8 Supervisor. It has been my great privilege and honor to represent the neighborhoods of District 8 these last 4 years. San Francisco has been a really great place to me. I came here when I was 11 years old. I was a kid who needed help, and I got it from folks outside my family, from teachers, from folks at the schools I was going, and was able to go on and go to undergrad at Yale and get a master's in public policy from the Kennedy School and go to law school. And prior to being a supervisor, spent 18 years as a practicing lawyer representing local governments and involving myself in our city's affairs and nonprofits. I was chair of the board of the LGBT Center, served on the Board of Appeals and the Building Inspection Commission, was elected to the City College Board at a time when City College was kind of falling apart, and helped save it from being de-accredited and closed. And 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to run for supervisor. And San Francisco is certainly a wonderful city. It's also a city with challenges. The best part of my job is getting to help people in communities respond to those challenges. The hardest part is not finding easy solutions to problems that we all see around us. But I think that in the 4 years that I've on the board, I have pushed the city to move in what I think is the right direction around the issues that are of most importance to San Franciscans. On homelessness, I think I've become the board's leading proponent of the notion that nobody should have to be sleeping on the streets at night, but nobody should be sleeping on the streets at night. On mental health, I've been the board's leading champion of conservatorship and ensuring that we have beds for folks who simply cannot take care of themselves. On public safety, I've been one of the folks who's been pushing yes for alternatives to policing, but also ensuring that we have the police officers who we need to do the work of keeping our neighborhoods safe. On housing, I've tried to find a middle path between people who believe that there's no need for any more market rate housing in San Francisco, which I think is plainly false, and people who think that to balance our housing needs, we need to get rid of every last protection that we may have for neighborhood character or neighborhoods at risk of displacement. I've been a champion for transportation. I'm chair of the County Transportation Authority, and I'm currently working hard to try and get our transportation sales tax renewed. And on environment, I've been honored to be able to lead some groundbreaking legislation, including legislation that required that all new construction in San Francisco be all electric and not have natural gas, and pushing the city to do more around water recycling and reuse. So I feel like I've done some good work for the voters of District 8 and folks in San Francisco over these last 4 years. I think I've struck a pragmatic, progressive tone that is useful to have on the Board of Supervisors. And I would be honored if people wanted to have me back for 4 more.
Okay. Thank you, Supervisor Mandelman. So candidate Kate Stoia.
Thank you. Yeah, and I said this to Paulina before, but you guys should feel free to call me Kate. You don't have to call me candidate Stoia. Thank you, though, for attempting to pronounce my last name. I want to say, first of all, thank you to Paulina and Lawrence and Activ8SF for reaching out to me and for setting up this forum. This is very exciting for me to be here. I've been interested in San Francisco politics for a long time, but this is my first political race. So thank you for the friendly welcome. I do know some people on this call, but I want to introduce myself to everybody else and let you know basically who I am and why I'm running. I moved here in 1989 to San Francisco, and I moved here because it was cheap. I was living in New York at the time, and I had just graduated from college. I wanted someplace friendly and inexpensive where I could afford to work in a nonprofit, which is what I knew I wanted to do. My first job here was with an AIDS education organization, the Stop AIDS Project, where I worked for 2 years alongside such great San Francisco activists as Ken Jones, who we lost during the pandemic, but who was a longtime friend and mentor of mine. I moved to District 8 in 1991, and I pretty much have never left, although I've lived all over District 8 in Noe, in Glen Park, and in the Castro. I was a renter for about the first 10 years I was here, and then I bought my first house in 1998. I think, like Supervisor Mandelman, I went to law school at UC Berkeley. I clerked for a federal judge after that, then practiced law for a few years. I did a range of things from employment disputes to civil rights actions. In 1999, I helped represent a transgender woman who had been misgendered by San Francisco police and wrongfully strip searched in by the sheriff's department in the jail. After a federal jury trial, we actually won that case. Our client was awarded compensation and punitive damages. My son was born in 2001 and my daughter in 2003. So I've been a parent, lo these many years. In order to spend time with my kids, I left the practice of law then, and I turned my energy really to volunteering in the community. I wrote for the Glen Park News, I organized park cleanups, I volunteered at Glide Church in their children's program, and I volunteered at my kids' schools. My husband is a contractor, and we sold our first house, which we had lived in then for a few years, more accurately camped out in during our remodel. And over the past 30 years, we've remodeled 5 more properties, often adding units where we can, always taking abandoned or derelict properties and turning them into beautiful and livable spaces. I'm really proud of the work we've done and the contributions that we've made to the city of San Francisco. We've kept workers and craftspeople employed even during the pandemic, and we have expanded and updated San Francisco's housing supply. Our most recent project was the restoration of a beautiful Victorian in the Mission District, which had been stuccoed over, abandoned, and then occupied by squatters for years. After the raw sewage was cleared out of the basement, we added a unit and eventually sold all 4 apartments to first-time homeowners there, including a teacher and a city employee. And I will say, though, that this work has given me insight into the bureaucracy and corruption that's holding San Francisco back. I think to many people, myself included, city agencies seem tasked with creating as many obstacles for ordinary citizens as possible, rather than supporting us. As far as building goes, guidelines, design guidelines, and even building codes are arbitrarily enforced. And this kind of discretion and what Supervisor Mandelman was talking about in terms of the balancing between kind of wanting development and wanting more local control in my opinion, leads to corruption and influence peddling. And I was shocked when I first started working on remodeling houses to learn that there's a whole group of people in San Francisco whose job is permit expediter, which generally means that they know the people in the planning or the building department, and they grease the wheels and sometimes cut the line for their clients. That is not a way to structure development in a city as dense as San Francisco and with such a huge need for housing. And I would say for people who follow the news, it's no wonder that we have such an enormous housing crisis and that the FBI has arrested and charged multiple heads of San Francisco departments, as well as permit expediters and building inspectors with fraud and corruption.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but I think if we're about at 5 minutes now, I know, we don't need to keep like super strict on the time.
Totally. I'll finish up quickly. Thank you so much. A friend of mine, the one other thing on my education that I'd like to add other than law school is like Supervisor Mandelman, I just completed a degree in public policy from the Goldman School at UC Berkeley. And I just would like to conclude by saying this. A friend of mine who I was talking about this race with today really put it best to me. She said, "You're a person of action," and it's true. I love to meet people from different backgrounds and cultures. I love to dig into policy issues, and I'm excited to do that tonight. And I believe that the role of government is to help make people's lives better. And that is why I got into this race. I have been really disappointed with Supervisor Mandelman's tenure on the board, although I think we share a lot of the same values. I think he has often been an ineffective advocate, and at worst, he's been an obstruction to progress on things from housing to homelessness, from clean streets to good governance. And I feel like to fix the problems in San Francisco and make it the best we can be, we need a District 8 supervisor who can commit to making real change, not someone who pushes through policies that the San Francisco Chronicle editorial board accurately describes as a cheap lie, or someone who votes against creating 500 units of new housing in the Tenderloin where the need is so great. We need a supervisor who's committed to actual progress in this district and not paying lip service to these values and hoping that the voters don't notice. So thank you. Sorry I ran a little long, and I am looking forward to discussing policy tonight.
No worries. Okay, so segueing from the, as you said, the need to make people's lives better, I really like that. So the questions that I have, let's see, especially the first question here pertains to making people's lives better. Okay, so I think I will let Kate, would you like to kick this off once I ask the question? Cool. Okay, so what incentives would you realistically offer small businesses in our area? Okay, and perhaps just focus on a couple.
Sure. I mean, I think the most important thing when we're thinking about small business in our area is streamlining the permitting process. And it's one of the major things that I would want to work on as a supervisor. I think anybody that follows local news here has seen the stories about the people who went into opening small businesses with all of the energy and the goodwill in the world, only to find themselves $100,000, $200,000 in debt, and the city blocking them through its insane amount of bureaucracy. So I think we need to streamline permitting, and I think we need to take all kinds of discretion out of the mix. I don't like when neighbors weigh in before a business opens on who they think should be employed there and what kind of business it should be. I would like to let small businesses try their hand in the neighborhood and see if they offer something that the neighborhood wants. So those are the main two things I need. And I will say, just on a personal note and as an aside, a friend of mine who's a young gay man and I thought of opening a small business in District 8 this year. And the truth is we were scared off by those stories, and that business will not end up opening. He's working out of a hair salon in Glen Park right now. And he is really worried about like what the next step for him to be, because rents are expensive in this city. This is a hard city to live in. It's expensive. And if you can't be sure that the city is going to partner with you when you have a great new small business idea, those are the people that we're going to lose. And I don't know whether everybody saw it in the news, but the most people who left during the pandemic were young people between the ages of 20 and 30. We lost an enormous number of people from San Francisco. We already are the most childless city in the nation. We need to focus on working with people to get their businesses open, working to allow more housing, working to allow everything to be easier, to get our streets cleaned up. And so getting back to small business, streamlining the permitting process and making sure that the city works as a partner with small business owners.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Rafael?
Thank you, Paulina. And I guess, as I said earlier, one of the best parts about my job, one of, I think, the basic parts about being a supervisor is working with all the people in San Francisco who are working every day to make the city better. And there are organizations and people who on all of these issues that we're going to talk about tonight have been advocating, have been in City Hall, have been fighting the fight. And it has been my privilege to try to support some of those efforts. And, I take the criticism from Kate that we are not, as a city, where we should be, far from it. But I do think, I have been in the ring these last 4 years. I've been in the ring the last 20 years. And there are hundreds, thousands of people actually working on these issues, whether it's the Golden Gate Restaurant Association, small business groups who come to City Hall, who promote legislation, who work to see that legislation passed, who try to reform our building code, who try to reform our planning code. We've done some of that in my office. We took a look at vacancies in the Castro, which I think is among the most impacted neighborhoods in District 8 around vacancies, and saw that, as I would agree with Kate, there's far too much complexity, and complexity is not our friend in making it easy for businesses to open. And so we looked for CUs that we could get rid of. We looked for things that we could principally permit. We looked for uses that nobody would really object to, but we were still making hard to get approved, and we took those out. There is a 40-year-old prohibition on new bars in the Castro neighborhood commercial district. We got rid of that prohibition. We are allowing people to open new bars. It was basically a protection racket for existing bars. That was an idea that came to us, but we worked with an entrepreneur who was like, why can't I open a bar? I, as a lesbian small business person, can't do this. And so we were able to work with her to do that. I was one of the leading proponents of or advocates for the shared spaces program, working closely with all the city departments to try and get that rolled out as quickly as we could during the pandemic, to allow restaurants and bars and other businesses to have more space when it was not safe to have them indoors. There have certainly been some challenges around making that program permanent. I don't think we've worked out all the wrinkles, but I've been there through that, working alongside, yes, city bureaucrats, but also advocates who have been doing that hard work. The reality, I think we'll talk about some of these questions going forward. The permitting process, the bureaucracy is too much, but I think the fundamental, most basic problem for many of the small businesses in the Castro, certainly other parts of the city to a lesser extent, or other parts of the district to a lesser extent, are street conditions and safety. There's a jewelry store on 24th Street, or there was a jewelry store that got broken into 4 times. After the 3rd time, I think they put in a metal gate, or that was the 3rd time. And on the 4th time, the folks who wanted to rob them just drove through the metal gate. And finally, that store owner gave up. So in the Castro, you have, and in the Mission, you have business owners who are and employees who are dealing with people with severe behavioral health issues coming in the door, stealing the tips, harassing employees, just asking for a level of care that is not what a small business person is prepared or able or even knows what to provide. And so I think that the work that I have been doing, and admittedly, we have not made the progress that I would like, but to try and get more exits from the street for people who are homeless, to try and get more folks into long-term care, and to try to make sure that the police department has the staffing that it needs to actually do the police work we need, are all responses to the needs of our small business community.
Great, great actually lead into my next question. And I think, both Rafael and Kate, both of you will eat this up because this is right up your alley. So regarding the people that are sometimes very, mentally, I mean, we're talking extreme cases though. We're talking extreme cases of the mentally ill neighbors. How would you apply pressure to act on conservatorship laws that, I mean, honestly, the most vulnerable mentally ill residents could be helped promptly, which is something we're not doing in the city.
Am I first on this time?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we need to change our conservatorship laws, but we really need places for people who can't take care of themselves. And so, just prior to my starting on the Board of Supervisors, Senator Wiener had gotten a bill passed in the state that created a new category of conservatorship for people who are cycling through psych emergency. The notion was, going back to the 60s, the replacement for the mental institutions that existed prior to the 60s was the Lanterman-Petrus Short Act. The Lanterman-Petrus Short Act says that you can involuntarily detain people, you can even conserve people if they are gravely disabled. As interpreted since that time, grave disability, at least in San Francisco, and there is not uniformity around this across the state, does not typically include repeatedly demonstrating you can't take care of yourself, that judges are just not treating that as grave disability, and getting into a psych emergency, having to be 5150 and taken to psych emergency 10 times in a year, that's not necessarily the basis for a conservatorship. Senator Wiener tried to change that. I argued San Francisco should opt into this tool. I wasn't sure how successful it would be, but I said if we're being given additional legal tools, we should take them. It was a battle royale. Everyone on all sides of this issue was fighting. The civil libertarians and senior and disability advocates were saying, no, this is terrible. This is a return to mass institutionalization. People who do think that we need a perhaps more coercive approach with folks who can't take care of themselves also turned out, and I was grateful for that. We fought a huge fight about it, got this law, at least enacted locally, and it has been, in my view, not successful. We've conserved probably 2 or 3 people through that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't have tried. It just means you've got to keep finding new things to try. Senator Susan Eggman, who is a senator from the Central Valley, has proposed a new reform of conservatorship that would allow us to conserve folks who are not able to meet their own medical needs. Right now, that's not enough to get you conserved. The person who has the open abscess, who you see on the street day after day, you cannot understand how this person who's clearly sick is not getting the care that they need. Well, Senator Eggman is trying to respond to that. I sponsored a resolution. I thought this would be simple. I thought everyone would agree at the San Francisco Board of Supervisors to get us to sign on to this bill and a number of other bills that Susan Eggman is pursuing in Sacramento. It was controversial at the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. It was referred to committee. We argued about it. We did finally get it passed, but we don't agree about this stuff, which I think is one of the reasons why it is hard to make progress. Now, even with the legal challenges around conserving people, I have also learned in these last 4 years of digging into these issues that we really don't have places for people who would need to be conserved and who do need to be conserved. In the middle of the last century, the second largest line item in the California budget was the state mental hospital system. State went out of that business. Nobody picked up the slack. Sacramento actually picked up the slack more than most places. We do 11% of the conservatorships in San Francisco. We do 11% of California's conservatorships here. We're 2% of the population. So we're doing more than our fair share, and we still don't have nearly the places we need. There are dozens of people who go through our jails. I've learned this from our jail health folks who go through jail every year, even in our reduced jail, even in this time when not a lot of people do much jail time. There are the people who are doing jail time. There's probably 40 or 50 folks a year who could be conserved, and they never bring the petition for those conservatorships because there's nowhere to put those folks. And add to this mess, Laguna Honda, which folks may be familiar with what's going on there. Extremely troubling. The Laguna Honda Hospital, largest skilled nursing facility in the United States of America. San Francisco is trying to do something that no one else does, which is have a county-run skilled nursing facility. Why? Well, because we're good-hearted and we try to do big things, and also because nobody else is doing it. And there is no other place for these folks. And we have been told by the federal folks who regulate Medicare and Medicaid that they want us to shut down Laguna Honda, and they want us to implement a plan to get all of those 700 people out of the hospital. Oh, more than 100 of those folks are these folks we're talking about, folks with severe behavioral health needs. This is, I think, that one of the biggest problems we're facing in San Francisco right now, and a huge challenge, and very concerning to me. At any rate, I've spent a lot of time over these last 4 years digging into these issues, trying to get more beds and trying to stop the loss of beds at places like Laguna Honda. And I think it is, frankly, one of the most important issues facing San Francisco, which is why I've put so much time and energy and effort into it.
And I agree. And that's why I asked the question. And there will be a follow-up. But Kate, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think that I basically co-sign everything that Supervisor Mandelman is saying. This is a statewide problem. This is something that has, been both a civil rights issue, a medical issue, and an issue of state and federal law. And I agree that it's complicated. I think the problem that I have, and where I would like to take the conversation, is that this also has to do, what Supervisor Mandelman was saying, is we don't have enough beds. And that is undoubtedly true. I mean, we live in America, and this is not a place that takes good care of people who are sick, especially poor people who are sick. But one thing that we can do in San Francisco specifically is we can create more housing. And if we create more housing and we loosen the housing market, people who are on the edge and who might tip over into homelessness and who might tip over into living on the streets with that abscessed leg or with a serious drug issue or alcohol issue or mental health issue might not have to. And so I think that many of San Francisco's problems, and something that we can locally control, is how much housing we're creating. And I will say that it is one of the reasons I decided to run. I was so frustrated by Supervisor Mandelman's vote on the 469 Stevenson project. And I'm also being really frustrated by the fourplex legislation that is basically supplanting SB 9 in the city of San Francisco. And I'd like to talk more about both of those, but just like specifically to the question that you asked, Paulina, just to make sure I'm getting to that. I mean, I do agree this is a really complicated issue, and we can do what we can. And what we can do in this city is incentivize and create more housing.
Okay. So regarding housing, so there are currently two, I guess, we will potentially see two housing measures on the ballot in November. And one of them is supported by London Breed. A bunch of us signed a petition. And then another one was introduced by Supervisor Chan. And I'm just kind of curious. I'm curious where each of you stand on these. And do you support either of them, none of them, and why? Let's go with Rafael.
Kate, I think we're alternating.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Either way, I'll go first on this one. Yes, I do support the mayor's proposal. And I will say that I find the competing proposals as a longtime voter to be one of the most frustrating things about living in San Francisco. This is not the first time, not the second time, not the fourth or fifth or sixth time that we have had these competing proposals on the ballot. They have confusing names, so they'll be called something that sounds very much like the other thing. And in fact, I have for 30 years been meeting with a group of people before every single election and going over the ballot in detail, because our ballots and our propositions are so confusing, and they are often designed to confuse. And I find that incredibly frustrating. So I support the mayor's proposal because that is the one that will truly streamline affordable housing. But I'd like to take a minute, if I have time now, to also talk about the fourplex legislation that I mentioned a second ago, and because I think that this is part of, it's definitely part of why I got into the race, and it's part of the housing conversation in the city. Sorry, Lawrence, are you trying to show me that I don't have time to do that? Oh, okay. I was like, why is he showing that to me? So basically, for people that don't pay super close attention to housing stuff, in January of this year, the state legislature passed SB 9, which is a bill that was created by and supported by Scott Wiener. And what that would do in all places like San Francisco at the time that had single family zoning, it would allow for density to be built on that place, either a duplex or a fourplex. It was not complicated, but it had rules to it about how much density you could add. And the important thing that SB 9 does and did in San Francisco before recently is that it took local control and local complaints out of the picture, and it created an opportunity for either a developer or a homeowner to build that density as of right. So you have a piece of property, there are rules that apply to it. If you meet those rules, you can build that newer, denser housing. That is a great rule. And everybody made fun of Woodside when Woodside tried to say, oh no, we're a protected mountain lion habitat. We can't possibly upzone here. And there was a huge backlash immediately, and rightfully so. Woodside is a city like any other city. And if you own a piece of property there, or if you buy a piece of property, you should be able to create density according to the mandates of SB 9. Recently in San Francisco, the Board of Supervisors passed this fourplex legislation, which Supervisor Mandelman was a big part of, and that made big headlines because it got rid of single family zoning, in San Francisco. But the important thing for people on this call to know, and for everybody to understand, is that the thing that did is it got rid of the protections of SB 9. So now you cannot build as of right, and you cannot create more density as of right on your piece of property, or you as a developer can't go in and do it. And the Board of Supervisors knew as of May of this year that no one could afford, it was always going to be a money-losing proposition to pass this new fourplex legislation because it has all of these other rules attached to it. And it allows for this neighborhood oversight and basically NIMBYism to come into play, which SB 9 explicitly did not. And so it's very, very frustrating to me. Anybody that subscribed to the Chronicle and has read their editorial, they called this a lie, and it is a lie, because in the name of getting rid of single family zoning, which most housing advocates would agree is a good thing, actually, we've simply maintained the status quo. We are not going to get any new housing built under this fourplex legislation, and we've gotten rid of the protections that SB 9 offered us.
Okay, well, that was a good answer, and I actually learned something. So thank you, Kate. Rafael?
Well, we can go into fourplex later. I'm not going to use up all my time to talk about it because I think it is important and I'm proud of it. And I started this conversation about fourplex in San Francisco long before SB 9 came along. And we did the work, and we did end single family zoning in San Francisco. And we actually are allowing sixplex houses on corner lots. And we can talk more about why SB 9 is not such a great deal for San Francisco. But your question, I think, was about the competing housing measures. Kate stated a basic idea that is true, which is that in the best universe, we would describe as fully as we can what we want in our codes, and then we would get out of the way and allow people to do the things that we have described in our codes. That gets harder as parcels get different, as projects get bigger, as conditions change. And so you can't always do it in advance, but as much as you can, particularly if you want more of a thing like housing, it's good to be clear about what you want, describe it, and then let the people produce it. So there's, insofar as the mayor's measure attempts to do that, I like it. Now, as I said yesterday in the Rules Committee, where we were considering Supervisor Chan's measure, there are also things about the mayor's proposal that I don't think are so great. And I actually think trying to work this out at the ballot is a super bad idea. The mayor's measure was written by folks, smart folks, but I had no opportunity to provide my input, and so my concerns about streamlining state density bonus projects, weren't incorporated. My notions about possibly providing off ramps after, say, 10 years, some possibility to have a future board of supervisors amend this, gone. Changes in the definitions of what affordable housing is to take it up to levels that we haven't before in San Francisco, maybe a good idea, maybe not, but maybe not something we want to lock in for 10 years. The other thing about the mayor's measure, actually both the mayor's and Chan's measure, are in some ways much ado about, it's not nothing, but it's not as much as people I think it is. These are limited, both of them, to parcels where there's no existing residential housing. So you're already eliminating a huge chunk of the places where you might think about adding density. So there are things that I would like to change about the mayor's measure, and there's no opportunity to do that through any kind of legislative process. So what I said about Supervisor Chan's measure was like, great, we have something in front of the board where we can try to come up with something that's our alternative, that maybe addresses some of the weaknesses of the mayor's measure, but is an honest effort to create more opportunities for people to streamline development of not just deeply affordable housing or affordable housing, but also market rate housing. I said this, I expressed my interest in doing this. I got no takers, and I ended up having to vote no on the Chan measure yesterday at Rules. Now, I've been very clear with the folks who are working on this legislation with Supervisor Chan that you can get my vote. We just, as a board, have to try to make an honest effort to actually address these problems. I think going forward, whether the mayor's measure passes, whether Supervisor Chan's measure passes, neither of these actually solves San Francisco's housing problems. And we need to get to a place where we can address these things through the legislative process, which is what I was trying to do in small part with fourplex. I shared the disappointment of folks who saw my modest fourplex proposal shrunk down. I still think we got a board which has a lot of members who don't even seem to accept that there's a connection between producing more market rate housing and reducing cost. We got this board to agree to an increase in density, to go up to 4 units everywhere, 6 units on corner lots. Not to the extent that I would have liked, but I think that was progress. And I think if we're actually going to get out of this mess that we're in as a city and as a state, we're not going to do it just by throwing bombs at each other on the ballot. There may be a role for that. Maybe that's what we're going to do this November. But ultimately, we have to be trying to build consensus to make progress. And that's what I was trying to do with fourplex. That's what I would like to try to do with this fight between the Breed and Chan measures. I don't know if I'm going to be, so far I've been unsuccessful in that, but I'm hoping we still have until Tuesday. We may be able to come up with something decent and honest as a real effort to streamline some actual housing that might get built through the Chan measure. I was destroyed in a 48 Hills piece last week that was accusing me of calling for the mass demolition of neighborhoods across San Francisco. So there is a risk in coming forward with honest proposals. And I do think that if we're going to make real progress, we need to have some conversations about how do you add density in neighborhoods where you already have housing? And what are we thinking about? What do we need to preserve? And how do we protect the people who are in those neighborhoods? And how do we nonetheless add density in a way that doesn't destroy the neighborhood? I'm trying to have those conversations with the Board of Supervisors. I'm taking the heat for it. Some people think fourplex went too far. Some people think clearly it did not go far enough. I tend to be in the category of people who think it didn't go far enough. But at least I'm in the ring trying.
Yes, I think trying is important. I mean, I do think that, building more housing is important, but I will hold my personal opinion as to which measure I support, although I did speak to it during public comment yesterday. So let's switch gears a little bit, actually a little bit, well, they do go hand in hand. So there's obviously drug dealing is a major problem in San Francisco. While I acknowledge that it's not as big of an issue in District 8 as it is in some areas in San Francisco, it is a big problem overall. And obviously supervisors have the responsibility to make the whole city function, right? So the question is, would both of you support a zero tolerance approach to drug dealing in our neighborhoods? Please elaborate on your answer.
I think that's me first.
Yeah, that's you first.
Okay. So it is undeniable that a huge chunk of our challenges around street conditions in the city are related to drugs. Early on the board of supervisors, I asked the mayor to convene a meth task force, which I co-chaired, because a lot of what we're seeing on the street, the behavior that you see that is so troubling, people acting out, people seeming to be maybe schizophrenic, like that is often meth. And we came up with a lot of good recommendations about things to move forward, including street crisis response teams and drug sobering centers. We did not talk about the supply side. We did not talk about whether it's even possible to reduce supply. In an ideal universe, I mean, I've never been a believer in the drug war. I've never thought that the criminalization of a public health problem was the right way to address substance use problems. My experience as a supervisor, however, has somewhat modified my views, and certainly about the tolerance of open air drug dealing and drug use in our neighborhoods. And Paulina, you're right. District 8 doesn't have the worst of it, but we got enough of it. In the Castro, particularly in the Mission, I mean, when I started, it was even more in the Mission, Dolores Park, the Dolores medians, many neighborhoods in the district were experiencing like very significant encampments and a lot of drug use and drug sales coming out of those encampments. I'm skeptical of the idea that we can get rid of drugs through an increased, that we can just police our way out of a drug problem. But the seeming complete removal of a criminal justice response, which feels like what we've got in San Francisco, is not okay. And it's not okay for the kids in the Tenderloin who can't walk the sidewalk. It's not okay for merchants in the Castro who are having, very threatening and frightened people coming into their stores. It's not okay for people who are having their windows randomly broken by people who are just in a mood and punch it out. I think that San Franciscans liked what Mayor Breed was talking about in the early days when she was talking about the Tenderloin plan. She was saying, we're going to have a state of emergency in the Tenderloin. We're going to step up our law enforcement, but we're not going to do it to try to get people in jail. We're going to do it to try to leverage people into treatment and care. You're not going to be able to continue. You're not going to be able to stay on the sidewalk dealing, certainly, or even using in open and flagrant way, but we're going to have another place for you to go, and you're going to have to go there. I don't think San Franciscans want a lock 'em up, hardcore Republican approach, but I think they're completely not okay with turning over these public spaces for drug markets. And that requires a police response. It requires a prosecutorial response. And it requires a lot of coordination between people who are not used to coordinating very well. Certainly the district attorney, the prior district attorney was on a perhaps different page from the police, maybe from the US attorneys and federal drug enforcement. Like, everybody kind of needs to be coordinating and working together. I had a lunch with someone in the US attorney's office who's saying, we do our pushes on things, but it's not necessarily when the city is pushing on enforcement in a particular area. Like there really is, I think, an opportunity with a new DA for the mayor maybe to bring folks together and try to coordinate a criminal justice response. And then the really hard part is to get the public health system participating in that as well, to actually have these two parts of government that do not coordinate well working together to get to leverage, to use the fact that people are committing crimes. They are engaging in criminal activity. They are disrupting communities, but we don't necessarily, if we can keep them out of jail, of course we want to keep them out of jail, but we can't just be sending them back out onto the street to recommit the same offense the next day. So how do we get them into some kind of care treatment program? And that requires a whole level of coordination that has not happened, and I think frankly has been hard to do, but may become easier with a new DA.
Yeah, and before Kate, you jump in, I just want to say, for anyone who has not heard, there is a new district attorney. Her name is Brooke Jenkins. That was just announced earlier today. So Kate, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute.
No
Yeah. Yeah, I agree basically with what Supervisor Mandelman is saying. I mean, these are, again, problems that are not specific to San Francisco, and that, I think one of the things that is frustrating to San Franciscans is that sometimes we do try to say we're going to take a very specific approach in San Francisco, which then kind of comes back and bites us in a way. And I think that is kind of what was going on with the previous DA. I feel like the decision, I think people were legitimately feeling scared. And I know I, as a parent and as a woman, there's a lot of places in the city that I feel like I can't walk. I certainly can't walk, at night after I go to the theater or something like that downtown. And so I do agree that we really need enforcement, and we need to feel safe in the city. I mean, you asked the question, do we take a zero tolerance approach? And I think that in general, a zero tolerance approach ends up, it doesn't usually end up accomplishing what we want it to accomplish, because what we want it to accomplish is that there's no more crime. And the fact of the matter is that zero tolerance just ends up with overstuffed jails, because as Supervisor Mandelman is saying, we often don't have places for these people to go. But again, we as San Franciscans who are just trying to live our lives in this city, we should not be bearing the brunt of that. And I mean, there was just a situation being discussed on next door, Noe Valley, at the Upper Noe Rec Center, that was absolutely terrifying for everybody there who thought this crazy man had guns, and it turns out he had knives, whatever. It was completely beyond the pale. We cannot live like that. And I think Supervisor Mandelman was saying that, and I echo that 100%. We really cannot live with the amount of completely out of control, very scary drug-addled behavior. And I will say also that as an attorney, I did represent people on death row. Almost to a person, every single person on death row committed their crime when they were super, super high. People do things when they're very high that they would never do if they weren't high. And sometimes those things are violent, and sometimes they have terrible consequences. So I do think it's a really, really important issue, and it does need to be dealt with. And I agree, we need more coordination, and we need more care. Again, a lot of these things also come back to, we need opportunities. We need housing, right? We need housing at all levels. And if we build more market rate housing that is going to loosen up the less expensive housing, we need business opportunities and the ability to boom, you have a business idea, great, let's support you, let's find some funding for you, let's get your business permitted and have you open within 30 days. Those are the things this city should be doing. I think that only focusing on the punishment is not going to get us the result that we want.
Okay. And so let's go to an indisputable fact. So all of these homelessness, drug use, lack of ability to afford housing. I mean, for some people have to do with lack of access to a good public education. So with that, this is Lawrence's question. Lawrence, very publicly supported the Board of Education recall. I was actually also, I was a signer of the Board of Education recall, one of the signatories. So the question is, public education, well, obviously has had a lot of shoes drop recently. What do you think of the proposed Ronan ERAF funding? And what would you do to support public school families in DA and the greater city? Lawrence is happy because this is his question.
That's Kate again.
Okay, Kate, it's all you.
I apologize. I didn't hear the funding piece. The what funding?
So Ronan's ERAF funding.
Yeah. Yes. So I just finished a master's degree in public policy at UC Berkeley, and I actually wrote my master's thesis on the enormously high opt-out rate in San Francisco from public to private school. And I know I have some fellow moms on this call. I can see them in the gallery, and they have heard me talk about this ad nauseum for years. So I'm sure that they are all going to get a drink right now and tuning out for the next 2 minutes. I was a huge supporter of the recall as well. My daughter, who is also on this call, it was in public school at Mission High when the schools shut down. And then when the board insisted on talking about school renaming and murals and, all the other nonsense, that was one of the biggest failures of representative government I've ever seen. And I was really happy that they were recalled. I think Supervisor Ronan's proposal to give more money to the schools is great. I don't think it's the only thing that's going to fix the schools. I think we need like a pretty concerted effort. And I certainly think the Board of Education really needs to get its house in order. It's a complicated issue, schools here in San Francisco, because many people are surprised to learn that the Board of Ed is so separate from the Board of Supervisors, from the mayor's office. Board of Ed elections prior to this recall were really down ballot elections that most people didn't pay very much attention to. And most people just used the markers of who's the union supporting or who is the Democratic Party supporting. I know many, many people in the city of San Francisco will no longer do that, myself included. But, honestly, I probably voted for the people who were recalled because what they had to say sounded like it would be good. And then they turned out to be, absolutely incompetent. So I do like the extra funding for the schools, but I think that my master's thesis argued, and I think it is the right way forward. The San Francisco public schools need to affirmatively incentivize people to come back to them. And I think they can't just take the stance that you are a racist if you don't send your kids to public school. There are a lot of private schools in San Francisco. I've sent my kids to both private and public school. And I had reasons, and most parents who send their kids to private school have really important reasons for doing that. I think education on this point would be helpful because everybody, the kids from higher socioeconomic levels, the kids from lower socioeconomic levels, and the entire city and community is better served when everybody is in school together. And education on that would have been helpful for me when I was choosing a kindergarten for my kids. And so I would love to be part of that effort. I'm not running for the Board of Ed, but I think that they have a lot of work to do educating people about the benefits of public education. And they also need to make the public schools, more welcoming. For example, every single private school in San Francisco will tell you where all its graduates went to high school and college. You cannot get that information, from the public schools. Mission High had 31 or 32 kids last year admitted to Cal. That's not on their website. They don't mention that to anybody. I mean, that's information that parents would love to have when choosing a high school. So long story short, yes, I support extra funding, but I don't think funding is the only issue.
Yeah, funding is absolutely not the only issue. But back to the funding issue, Rafael.
Thanks, Paulina. Well, I'm supporting Supervisor Ronan's measure. I'm a co-sponsor of it as of yesterday. I think it is important for the city to think about how we provide money to the district. The city already provides a very significant, and has for decades now, a very significant, I think more than $100 million a year shifts from the city's general fund over to the school district. And that is, important, essential funding. It's good that we do it. It is also really important that the district be well run. And as we think about giving them more money, I think we also need to think about whether it is possible to use the leverage we may have as a funder to try and get better governance out of the district. There was an effort that almost made, that folks were working on to try and get a ballot measure on the June ballot that I was supportive of. It was killed at the Board of Supervisors, but it was an effort to kind of attach some strings to the money that the city sends over to try and at least get the members of the school board to have to sort of certify that they're following the state guidelines and rules about how school boards are supposed to act. There was that was killed. People weren't interested in pursuing that. I thought it was not a bad idea. My concerns about, I think Supervisor Ronan did a lot of good work on her measure. Initially, I had concerns. It initially, at least, was based on a particular model, community schools. It was, going to have each school applying to the city to get funding. It felt quite bureaucratic and quite disconnected from any kind of effort the school district might be making to, for example, establish minimum standards. Supervisor Ronan did good work with smart people in the school district and outside the school district to change her measure and bring in that feedback. And I think by the end, it actually is a constructive contribution. And I think that money that gets that additional, $30 to $60 million a year will be spent well. And I think we're likely to get called upon, to try to find more money. The risk with any kind of set aside, is one, if you don't have a new funding source, it's taking away from something else. And I'm passionate about, for example, trying to have more beds for people who are in need of care. And so those are funds that are not available. But I do feel like this has been massaged and improved and is worth it. And there are protections built in for the general fund if, for example, the ERAF funding, which is probably too complicated for us to talk about here today, but if the ERAF goes away. I am proud that I was the second elected official in San Francisco to call for Allison Collins' resignation, and I want to congratulate the parents who did the work to gather the signatures and campaign to throw out at least two school board members who absolutely clearly didn't, had, in my view, completely blown it. And honestly, as a group, they were not performing well. So I think, that was an achievement for people who leaned in and were tired of the politicians screwing things up. And I want to commend all of you for your extraordinary work. And so many organizations actually came out of that effort. Meredith Dodson's group, other folks have remained engaged and involved, and I think that's really good. And honestly, I think we have 3 really good new school board members out of it, and I think the overall performance of the school board has vastly improved. I have my doubts about democratic elections of school board. As a former community college trustee, I have my doubts about democratic elections of community college boards because I'm not sure that, as Kate was saying, voters are really well equipped to make decisions about who should be the stewards of educational institutions. I think people are pretty good at figuring out can that person be my supervisor? What do I think? Do I agree with them about housing, crime, all these, landlord, tenant, blah, 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 pick your issues. I mean, I think people can grapple with that. I think they can grapple with, like, should that person be my mayor? Might be able to figure out, should that person be my district attorney? But should that person, do they have the requisite qualifications to conform to state ed code requirements around running a school district? Like, I'm not sure that we are well served. I was encouraged by efforts during the pandemic to see if we could get away from that and maybe have shared appointments between the mayor and the school board, or the mayor and the board of supervisors, or some other way of selecting these folks that might, encourage, get some folks on these boards who would not otherwise run for them. Unfortunately, the polling shows, even if the people hate the school board members they elect, they don't want to give up their right to elect them. That didn't really go anywhere. But anyway, congratulations to the parents who got rid of those folks and got us some better folks.
Yes, congratulations. I agree. And so we definitely don't need any more incompetent electeds like the people that were recalled, in my opinion. And, to that end, and I just want to wrap this up because I do want to give the public some time, give our neighbors some time to ask questions. You as competent electeds, potential electeds, what is the one thing, and this is hard, the one thing that makes you the best qualified supervisor to serve my district, Lawrence's district, District 8?
Am I starting that one?
Yes, please.
Okay. I think it's 22 years of experience working on these issues. I think it is having been engaged, having been in the ring as a neighborhood activist, having been the president of the Noe Valley Democratic Club, having served on the Building Inspection Commission back long ago, having been on the Board of Appeals, having tried to fight these fights and seeing how hard it is to win, and having some notion of how you work your way through to try to make progress, having helped save City College and actually led the fight to save City College, and then led the board through the restoration of local control, and having spent the last 4 years working in each of these areas where I have not made it the most, as I said, the most frustrating part of my job is the problems are so complicated and the successes are so incremental. It's very frustrating, but I don't think there's another way to do it. I don't think there's any one person, certainly not a person on the Board of Supervisors, who can single-handedly solve these things. I think you put your, arm against the wheel or whatever it is and push as hard as you can, and everybody else pushes as hard as they can, and that's how we make progress. There are great groups, Rescue SF, other groups that are working on some of these challenges. People can get engaged, get involved, and I did that. I am not the same person. I also have been changed by the experience. I am not the same person I was when I ran against Scott Wiener for the Board of Supervisors in 2010. I'm not the same person I was when I ran for the Board of Supervisors in 2018. I've learned from my experiences. I've seen the areas where things that I thought were self-evidently clear are actually more complicated. I've heard from more people, and I've seen more of, the sausage making of governance. And I think that, I think my views and values are aligned with the majority of the district. I think we are the second most, believe it or not. If you look at the Progressive Voter Index, District 8 is the second most progressive district in the city. We are supportive of criminal justice reform and redistributive taxation, and we want to protect vulnerable people. We're also skeptics, liberals who think about things deeply and don't settle for easy solutions. And I feel very comfortable representing those folks, or trying to represent you all on the Board of Supervisors. I don't always get my way, and the views that we may, I think, mostly share may not be majority views in San Francisco, but I try to move that board closer to where I think we are, where I think the right answers are. And insofar as, we need to go outside the board, we work on the ballot.
Okay, so to clarify and summarize, your one thing is your experience being served. Okay, got it. Okay, Kate?
Thanks. I mean, if I had to boil it down to one thing, I guess I would say that I get things done when I find problems that need solving. I am not a politician. This is my first race. And I think in some ways, that's a good thing, because I haven't spent a lot of years building up political alliances that I need to cater to. And what you hear from me and what you see from me in my life in San Francisco and in District 8 is what you'll get. I am not afraid to stand up for what I believe in. I think that, Scott Wiener was a great supervisor for the almost 8 years that he was my supervisor. I was surprised to learn recently that he not only did not support Supervisor Mandelman's election, but really actively campaigned against him. And I'm not sure, if that political alliance has shifted, but a lot, Supervisor Mandelman came to my door and knocked on my door when he was campaigning. And I really appreciated it. I really appreciated the personal outreach. I will say that I've emailed his office several times seeking help with problems that I'm having with city government and not gotten a response. I've never gotten a response from Supervisor Mandelman himself. And sometimes I will get a response a couple days later from someone in his staff. That's been really frustrating for me as a San Francisco resident, especially as a longtime resident that's had a number of supervisors, most of whom were significantly more responsive to me, especially when, I'm not like emailing him just to, chew the fat. I'm emailing because I'm having a problem with something that's going on in city government. So what I can say is that I've put a lot of time into building up the community that I live in being a part of it that is a force for good. And I would bring that same energy and that same lack of BS to the Board of Supervisors. I mean, I feel like if you've lived in District 8 for the past 4 years and you feel like it's been going great with Supervisor Mandelman, then you should vote for him again. If you're aligned with the stance that he's taken on housing, I can't argue with that. I am not aligned with those. I know that when Supervisor Mandelman was running for the seat that Scott Wiener vacated, Scott Wiener said really clearly, Rafael Mandelman does not actually represent the values of District 8. And, I have to say that the votes that he's taken and the actions that he's taken lead me to that same conclusion. So I would say that my one thing, I know you asked him to boil it down to one thing, and I'm trying to really boil it down. I think that I will get things done that have not, gotten done. Our streets are covered in garbage. That has not changed in the last 4 years. And Supervisor Mandelman was part of the group that sat and listened to this ridiculous plan for $20,000 garbage cans for our streets. And I don't know, didn't raise his hand and say like, this is not a good idea, and just went along with it. I don't feel like we are getting concrete solutions to actual problems in our district and citywide. If anyone on this call feels like things are going great, of course they should support the re-election of Supervisor Mandelman and any other board member that's been serving this whole time.
Okay, so your one thing, just based on your no BS approach, and actually the opposite of Rafael's, a lack of experience because you have no alliances, you feel like you could actually get in there and get things done, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm someone with a lack of life experience. I certainly have a lack of political experience other than working on political, campaigns and what, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I meant, political experience. Okay, cool. All right, so it is 8:12 and I do not want to go past 8:30. So I'm going to go ahead and give Lawrence the floor and have him open this up to the public for some of their questions.
Thank you, Paulina. Thank you, Supervisor Mandelman, and thank you, Kate Stoia. Tremendous answers, great collegiality. And thank you so much, everybody that's been so patient and so quiet on this whole hour. I feel that it's quite a bit of information all at once, and we're still kind of digesting the DA news and the last elections. So having all these topics about D8 being in front of us is a little bit change, but it's fantastic that both of you are so involved in so many details. I hopefully will get a chance for at least 2 questions if you guys have time and are willing. And I want to just, if possible, select a couple that represent some of the items that in general are bubbling up on top. And one that, and the way I want to do it is I want to have the person who wrote in this question ask that question. And the first one that I would like to do, if that person's available, is Chris Faust. If he can unmute and ask that question. If not, I can ask.
Okay, I'm trying to remember what the question was.
It's
You know what? Why don't you read it for me, since you're right there? Okay. I mean, I know I wrote a question. I like the question, but I don't think I could. I would just paraphrase it, and I think I wrote it very specifically that I would want read verbatim.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. So Chris filled in this question: how will you support San Francisco's economic engine that fund our robust social programs? So again, same amount of time. One of you first, and then the other can respond. I kind of lost track. I'm sorry. Who's next on these things? I think Kate responded second, so she's first this time around. So please, if you can.
Sure, thank you. Some pieces of San Francisco's economic engine don't need a ton of help. You know, the Googles and the Apples and the Facebooks do not need a lot of help pursuing their economic objectives. I think what really needs help are the small businesses. And as I talked about at the beginning, I think it's one of the most important things that the city can do is partner with small businesses and anyone that's interested or even has an idea for a small business and get them operating and help them secure financing and help them, you know, really like work for a living. And I think that is the most important thing that we can do citywide.
And I guess I would say, you know, I think, I guess 3 things come to mind. One is I think we need to address street conditions throughout the city, especially in our downtown, especially in heavily impacted neighborhoods like the Castro and the Mission. I think we need to get more. I think we need to end street encampments in San Francisco. I spent 2 years trying to push the Board of Supervisors to say that shelter for all should be our policy. 1, because it's the right thing to do, and 2, because we are not going to resolve encampments unless we have alternative places to offer people. You know, I've managed to get that legislation enacted, and our next step will be a report that we get from the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing around what implementation would look like and would cost, and we'll see that in December. I think we need to look at probably another round of business tax reform. There are some in businesses. It's, you know, devising our business taxes is an art, not a science. It often happens in hurried conditions as elected officials are looking for revenue sources to close gaps in the budget. But there are businesses in fintech who are, because of the sort of, I think maybe even mistakes in our tax code, have en masse left the city and are down at Oyster Point. I'm not into sort of Twitter tax breaks and just sort of like targeting particular industries to draw them in. But if we have a tax structure that is unreasonably pushing people out, we need to think about trying to fix some of that. I think particularly with our downtown as impacted as it is. I mean, the vacancies in our commercial properties are not good and are going to be a problem for our city budget. And the third thing, a thing that gives me hope for our future, is I think we need to be working hard on the transit system that will support our city going, you know, over the next 10, 15 years. I am, as I said, working hard on a renewal of our transportation sales tax for the November ballot to try to actually create the Grand Central Station of the West Coast in the basement of the Salesforce Tower. We can get high-speed rail into downtown San Francisco, pointed towards the East Coast, the East Bay through a second tunnel. I mean, this is all going to take till we're old, or maybe it's even for your kids, those of you who have kids. But we need to move these projects along. It's good for jobs, and it's good for the city, and it's good for our downtown. And so I'm excited about some of the big transportation projects that, if we learn some of the lessons from projects like Central Subway and Van Ness BRT and do not repeat them, could really be very exciting.
Let me unmute. I have a question from Billy. I'm not sure he's here, so I will try to ask it. Sorry if I just lost it. Give me a second. And I think it'll be something that you can just have a pretty quick answer to already, because we talked a lot about it in general. And it's related to what are your priorities and how can you execute on them with the dysfunction in city government?
Well, this is what I wrestle with every day. My priorities are clear, and I think they're the priorities of my constituents: homelessness, mental health, substance use, safety. These are among our top priorities, and then trying to figure out a way forward through this thicket of wildly divergent views on housing. As I said, I'm one of 11. And so my ability to be effective in City Hall depends on my ability to convince 5 of my colleagues to agree with me on something, which often involves compromises that you have to weigh. Is this a compromise worth making? The alternative is to go outside the building and try to shift the Overton window. The mayor is trying to do that. But again, I think ultimately fights at the ballot are not the way forward to solve these problems. We need to have people in City Hall who can do the job that we are asking of our elected officials, and we need to try to find more consensus among San Franciscans themselves. I think it's really useful. I've done neighborhood meetings with folks on sidewalks, particularly during the pandemic, in neighborhoods heavily impacted by encampments. And the most difficult of those meetings, but in some ways the most revealing, have been the ones where different people with different views have actually had to confront each other and hear directly from the people who don't want any police response to the person, versus people who feel really unsafe with someone losing their mind at 3 o'clock in the morning, maybe with a knife. And having people have to grapple with the sort of lack of consensus within even a small community, even a block. And that's kind of, San Francisco is that writ large. So I think part of being effective, as a supervisor or as, an elected official in San Francisco, is trying to figure out how to get people to talk to each other, and where is the consensus point where we can try to make progress. I feel good about that. We may be doing that around shelter and shelter for all, but clearly there's, a lot more areas where we need to do that.
Okay. I would say that my top priorities would be to grow our housing stock, but we need more housing in this city. That's non-negotiable. We do not have enough housing, and it is too expensive. My kids are, I have a 21-year-old. He can't afford to live here. He needs to be at home in his childhood bedroom. It is too expensive here. We need to loosen up the housing stock by building more. So I think the most important thing there is streamlining the permitting process, going to as of right building, as I said, incentivizing density for real, and not in a manner that actually undercuts the law that does do that. And then in the meantime, I would vote yes on every single housing project. I don't understand Supervisor Mandelman's vote on the Stevenson project. I think it was really disappointing to me and to many people citywide. And I haven't heard a good explanation for that other than the obvious one, which is just like purely political. Another priority for me would be to support, as I've said, incentivize our small business community. Again, streamlining permitting, again, taking discretion out of the mix. As Supervisor Mandelman has pointed out, we really need to do something about homeless encampments. They are not safe and they are problematic for business and just for living, including for the people that are living in the encampments. And then the final thing is I would make it a priority to respond to San Franciscans' sense that the city is not working for them. This is partly clean streets. It's partly, the business stuff that we've talked about, partly the encampments. It's smaller things as well, or, maybe it could be bigger. I mean, as I've talked about, I have not felt for a long time that this city partnered with me in any way, from getting sewage cleaned up on my street when the pipe bursts, to getting, basic garbage pickup, to getting businesses open, to helping me when I have a problem with a city agency. I had a tax problem that the assessor kept, sending me these crazy tax bills, and I would go down there and take a little number and sit, and then they'd have to text me, and then I'd sit some more. It's really hard to find people that are like, okay, yes, let me help you solve your problem. How would I deal with the dysfunction? I mean, one of the things I think is really important is calling it out for what it is. And I think in some ways, the supervisor from District 8, given the really important role that District 8 and especially the Castro has played in this city's history and in this country's history, in some ways, I feel like that person has a special responsibility to make sure that voices that are otherwise unheard are actually heard. And I was again disappointed with reporting about Supervisor Mandelman in the wake of the Aaron Peskin scandal. Aaron Peskin had been a horrible bully for years to almost every single staffer and city agency employee that came before the Board of Supervisors. Everybody knew that. Anybody that follows politics in San Francisco knew that for years and years. Now, he was struggling with an alcohol problem, and I have a lot of sympathy and empathy for that, but I do not have any sympathy or empathy for a bully. And nobody called him out. And it took a female Black mayor to finally say, my department people don't need to put up with this, and they don't need to go in front of him. And when he was asked about this, Supervisor Mandelman said, well, it's not really my place. And I fundamentally disagree with that. It is everybody's place when someone is acting like a bully, especially in the workplace, especially among staffers that do not have, or agency representatives that don't have the power of an elected political office behind them. It's everybody's job to call that out. And every single person on that Board of Supervisors should have said something. So anyway, part of getting city government to work better is just being honest about what the problems are with city government. That we can't call something a fourplex legislation when you know full well that no fourplexes will be built as a result of that legislation. In fact, it's significantly less, density is significantly less likely to occur with Supervisor Mandelman's legislation than with the SB 9 that we already had, that actually, according to the report to the Board of Supervisors, would have provided more density and more housing. So I think we need to be honest. I think most people in San Francisco are frustrated with the political representation that they get and are frustrated with the results that we can see on our streets. This is the most dysfunctional city many people have ever lived in. And, it's not going great. It needs to change.
Oh, wow. Thank you for those answers. The answers and the questions are tremendous. We could go till midnight just on the questions that are here. If you guys can indulge just one more question, and then we can wrap up, that'd be super. It's another question, but from someone that looks like is not in attendance. It's from Gary Decad from Buena Vista Heights. What are you going to do to create transparency about the corruption in the city from the mayor on down? Kate, please, first.
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the beginning, I had to cut my little intro statement a little bit short because even though I edited it all day and had my kids edit it with me, it was still way too long. But I think the reason that we have this corruption is because we allow discretion to be part of the way that we run our building department. For example, the building department was one of the main problems, that and DPW, right? Anytime you allow discretion into a governmental decision, you are opening the door to corruption. And you are opening the door also to the appearance of corruption, because anybody that has any issue before the government, if they think that another person that has an issue before a government body knows somebody on that body, they are not going to have faith in the decisions that the government body makes. So I think we need to move to transparency and clarity and less weighing in by our supervisors, by our neighbors, by anybody on business issues and on housing issues. And we're going to see a lot change in terms of corruption, because where there is transparency, and where there are set rules that everybody needs to follow, it is much more clear when there's a transgression. When there are rules that are just up to however that person feels or what they think about this particular issue, that's where you get corruption. And this is where we have a problem in San Francisco. We need to get rid of that.
I share with Kate a desire to see simpler systems and more. And I think it was actually Supervisor Melgar. There was a profile of her after she was elected, and she has a lot of experience. And she was on the Building Inspection Commission for many, many years. That the more complicated things become, the more room there is. Just both one for inefficiency and just bad service, and then two, for a need to hire particular people to do workarounds, and there's an invitation to corruption. I think that I worry that the response to Nuru Gate has included an attack on public-private partnerships and a growing skepticism about the capacity to use public-private partnerships effectively. There was a measure on the most recent ballot. It got 70% of the vote. I was in the ballot along with Senator Wiener, in the ballot handbook along with Senator Wiener and Supervisor Melgar and Stephanie, arguing against this measure because it would make future public-private partnerships around our parks, around a number of areas where private philanthropy has been very helpful, much harder. So I think certainly we need to try to increase transparency. I agree with Kate that one of the best ways to eliminate corruption is just to make things simpler where you can. And I do think there are places where you have to preserve discretion because not every situation is the same. So I think it's a balance. I don't think it's a binary. You can just eliminate all discretion, but I think we have too much discretion in our system and we have way too much complexity, certainly in the building department, but in many other departments as well. I also think we have to be careful about overkill and ending a whole bunch of good things and a bunch of good public-private partnerships because of some folks who were doing really terrible things in City Hall for too long.
So Lawrence, it is 8:30. I do think we should start wrapping up at this point. We did promise people an hour and a half max, but I would like to keep my promise as well and do the 1 minute of closing remarks for each person. That's kind of.
You want me to go first?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, as I said, it has been a tremendous honor to represent District 8 over these last 4 years. It is a constantly frustrating job in that the problems are so huge and sometimes seem impossible. But I get to work with so many amazing folks in the community There are so many ways for people to get involved and engaged. I encourage everyone on here to do that. Many of you are on this Zoom, so you already are, but there are groups working on all the problems that we have talked about. They engage with supervisors. For anyone who has had trouble getting in touch with my office, Kate, if you are one of those people, I apologize for that. I think someone put my email into the chat. I'm going to add my staff email because I personally get hundreds and hundreds of emails every day, including, and then hundreds more that go into spam. Sometimes I just do not see your emails, but that does not mean I do not want to hear from you, and that doesn't mean our office cannot help. So don't just email me. Also email Mandelman staff at sfgov.org. I have office hours twice a month. I do virtual office hours and in-person coffees. I encourage people to, if you want to come chat with me, I try to be accessible. That is one of the virtues of having neighborhood supervisors, is that there is a person, even if I can't fix all the problems, you can come tell me what you're seeing and what you think I should be doing. And that's, I've been enjoyed doing that for these last 4 years, and I would be grateful for another 4.
Okay, thank you. It is nice to meet you at last, as Supervisor Mandelman. And I really want to say thank you again to Paulina and Lawrence, and just want to echo what's being said in the chat, which is that this was really productive and interesting and useful. So I really thank you for putting it together, because, it takes dedicated volunteers to do stuff like this, and I think it's awesome. So thank you. I want to say one other thing, which I got cut off, or I cut myself off in the intro, which is that 5 years, only because I know that he's on this call, 5 years ago, my husband and I became foster parents, and we have 3 kids now. So I mentioned 2 of them, but then I had to take out the whole interim part about that mentioned him. So I want to say that he's doing awesome, and is going to go into junior year next year at Mission High, and is working this summer at the Rec and Park department in summer camps. Again, I just kind of want to tell everybody on the call, thank you for joining. I look forward to hearing from people in the coming weeks and months, what your issues are. And again, I would say, if you're happy with the way things in San Francisco are going, by all means, keep them going on the same path. If you don't feel like the path is the right one, as I don't, please join me and help me figure out how to make it better. Thank you.
Okay, and I would also like to say thank you for everybody, and this forum could not have been successful without Kate, without Rafael, without Lawrence, without all of you who came tonight and gave us an hour and a half of your time. We will be holding more forums and other events and other learnings. So if you would please, if you do live in D8 and you're not currently in our group, if you visit www.activ8SF.com, and that does have the number 8 in it, you can sign up for our newsletter, and that's essentially just joining our group. And then Lawrence, if you have any closing remarks, just very briefly. No? Okay, well then we could adjourn the meeting, and have a great night, everybody.